Welcome back to Halloween 365. My name is bshowbrian. The mood lighting is appropriate for this episode to give it a little bit more of a spooky ambiance because instead of talking about a horror movie this week, or instead of talking about a movie that was never made, or a horror comic, or doing an interview with somebody, what I want to do is share something personal, a story that felt to me like it was right out of a horror movie, and a story that I didn't think I was going to survive. Now, it's a bit of a teaser. It's not quite that dramatic. On its face, it probably was pretty benign, and it was a misunderstanding. But as I tell the story, you'll probably understand why I felt the way I felt, especially if you've seen horror movies like I have. And that's probably why you're viewing this channel, because you have, and you love horror movies just like I do. So if you like my videos, subscribe, like, spread the word, do whatever you feel like doing, or just pull up a chair, sit down, kick your feet up, and sit with me for a minute while I sit by the fire and relive this experience. My name is bshowbrian. I talk about horror, all things horror. Check me out on my socials at bshowbrian. All right, now straight to it. I want to get right to it because I don't want to take up too much of your time tonight. But I wanted to try something different here. So, in probably 2010, I was working for a company where I wasn't necessarily doing door to door solicitation, but I was making house calls a lot. And I'll never forget the first time I walked up to someone's door, a stranger. I had permission to come to their house. But the first time I ever went up to a stranger's door and stood on their porch, I can still visualize it. I can feel the porch under my feet. I can feel the brick on the side of the house as I kind of felt for the doorbell. I just remember how awkward it felt to be standing and about to walk into a stranger's house that I didn't know. I knew the neighborhood, knew the streets, and most times I would know where I was going because I stayed local. But being a young guy and not having a very deep marketing pool from friends and family, a lot of times I would get leads on the outskirts of town, 45 minutes away, an hour and a half away. And some of you know through Break the Apocalypse podcast that I'm from Ohio. I'm from the Toledo area. And there's about 4 big cities in Toledo. There's Toledo, which is a mid-sized city, Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland. You know the other 3 more than you know Toledo. And then there's some other smaller cities. A little smaller than Toledo is Dayton. There's some college towns. Miami of Ohio is a college football team. Miami University. Akron, Bowling Green, Findlay, some Division II, Division III schools. So what would happen is most times I was in the suburbs, but probably once or twice a month I would have to drive an hour to an hour and a half into the country and make house calls on people that hadn't been seen in quite some time. So they weren't always the most thrilled people in the world to be calling on. Now I'd made friends and I'd started in at this company with a girl who I became friends with. Her name is Jessica, and I should get her on. I should do a follow up on this with her because I know she remembers this. We've talked about it, and it was very difficult. You got to set your own appointments, set your own hours. You have a sales quota you have to meet, and she was nearing the end of her run there, and she came to me before she left, and she had a stack of files, about 5 or 6, and she said all of these people, these households I visited, they're hot leads. I've done the work. You just have to go and close them. And I thought, wow, it's a pretty decent opportunity. As I mentioned, it was tough. I didn't have a deep market, naturally from friends and family for a certain reason. But being young, I don't believe my wife was pregnant yet, but we were trying. So I was trying to make some shit happen, and it was really desperate. And this story became the basis for a short story I've tried to write several times. It's too personal for some reason for me to turn it into a story because the fictionalized version never really goes anywhere. But I get a stack of files, and I call this gentleman up, and I set this appointment, and I'm off. Okay, so I'm seeing 2 other appointments before this guy, and bear with me, trying not to get too technical. But I'm seeing 2 other appointments before this guy, and they're away. They're closer to town than he is, and he's like another. Basically, he is between 2 rural towns. He's way out there in the middle of nowhere. He's like 45 minutes between. He's an hour away from me, 45 minutes between 2 small rural cities, barely on the map. I have no idea where I'm going. So go figure. Here comes the appointment, supposed to be around dinner time, 4 or 5 o'clock. And I'm late because my other 2 appointments run over, and I misjudged how far away this person's house was. Excuse me. So I'm driving to the house, and I realize I'm going to be about 30 to 45 minutes late because not just the drive and the traffic, but because the other appointments had run over so much. So I call the person up, and I'm not getting them. And now this is pretty common back then for me, is I would set an appointment that was an hour and a half away, and on the way there, I'd call just to make sure people were still home. Sometimes they wouldn't be there. Sometimes they'd forget. So I tried to make a habit to call people the night before, the day of, just to make sure we were still on. So I get about, I don't know, halfway to the house, and I get a hold of the person. And the guy doesn't seem too happy. He forgot I was coming, and he's just gotten off work. So he says, okay, this will give me time to straighten up and make some dinner and all that stuff before you get here. I'm thinking, okay, cool, no problem. So remember, this lead had been set up to me and teed up by another person that left the business, who was having a hard time, who wasn't meeting certain expectations, and had to leave the business. Had to leave the company, not the business. She wasn't like pushed out or sanctioned or anything, just quotas, and wasn't making it happen, right? For herself or for the company. So she gives me these leads. This person supposedly has already seen her, and I can't find the house. My MapQuest, when I tried looking it up, I forgot to mention this, because this is back, boys and girls, in the days of MapQuest. Here's a picture into bshowbrian's early days. And around that time, I was starving doing this job. My wife had a good job, but I was personally starving, and I was desperate. And this will give you an idea as to how desperate I was to see people. I didn't have enough money every month to build into my budget to pay for unlimited data for a cell phone plan, which was like, what, $100 a month at the time? We were pinching pennies. So I was printing off MapQuest directions. And if I got lost, there's times where I got lost on backcountry roads in Ohio, and I drove and drove until I found a town, and then tried to stop and connected to McDonald's with my laptop for directions. I mean, that's the type of shit that I had to do back on the back roads of Northwest Ohio. So I'm coming up close to where I think this house is, and I can't find it. And this road that I'm on it's not completely desolate, but it's got farmland all around it. So there's no like town, no suburb, no city. It's just like a main drag with some industrial farm type of companies, probably some tool and die companies, suppliers for like the automakers and things like that, manufacturing. But it's all like a single lane on each side. It's not a big street, road, boulevard. It's just a road through. There's tumbleweeds, I'm sure, were rolling behind me, but it was getting dark at that point. And I couldn't find this fucking house. And the MapQuest directions couldn't find the house because the street name was similar to the city or township name. And this was in an area where it technically fell in like a township and not the city. So MapQuest had no idea where this house was. I went on the best directions I could find at the time. So I'm looking for house numbers. I find the street. I know I'm on the right street. I can't find it. I'm going up and down and up and down. And I already knew I was going to be late. I'm extra late. And it's dark now. So now it's dark. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I don't know where I'm at. I think I'm on the right street. I can't find the house. and now it's dark because it's around Thanksgiving. It's like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, starting to get cool and damp in the air, and it's dark and I can't see shit. So I decide, in my wisdom, to call the guy again, and he's trying to give me directions, but I can't find the house. And again, this isn't like looping through an industrial park or anything like that, anything complicated. It's not a subdivision or anything complicated like that. It's a one lane road, one lane going each way, I should say. 2-lane road with not a whole lot on it except for just a row of houses and buildings. Not going so well. Not making a good first impression. So I'm already nervous. It's dark. I'm lost. I'm disoriented. So I find a close enough house number. And I pull up in this stranger's house. And this person meets me. Like before I can get out of the car, they're on the porch with the front light on. It's one of those towns. If it wasn't white, I'd probably be in some trouble right now. But I get out of the car. And the person, before I could even get out, they said, "Hello, can I help you?" So they saw me passing by. And I reference the address. They said, "We don't know where that is. This is blah, blah, blah address. We would assume it's 2 or 3 houses down the other way." It's like, okay. "Do you know this person? I have an appointment. I'm supposed to meet him at their house." They said, "No, we don't know that person." So now it's getting weird, okay? So first MapQuest can't find the house. But I know someone's been there. Now, the neighbor 2 or 3 houses down on this one road where there's not a whole lot there except for some industrial and some houses. 2 to 3 houses away, maybe, by his estimate, doesn't know the guy. Not a good sign in a town like this that's so small. You should know everybody around you. So, finally, I pull up the road and I call the guy on the phone and I think I find the house. The guy says, "Look for," God, I don't want to be too descriptive just because, this does go out over the air. But basically there was a landmark in the back. And it was like a public area behind the house. Somewhat public. Not a public, like a park or anything, but like an antenna type thing. So he says, "Look for the antenna." I'll just call it the antenna. Look for the antenna. And there's an alley that runs between my house and the next one, and it goes up across to the next street. And this isn't a gravel alley. This is just dirt, like dirt and grass. It's not really an alley. It's just like a go-between. And he says, "Don't park in the alley. I don't have a driveway. You can park behind the house." And I pull up, and I see this house, and I say, fuck that. I am not pulling behind a stranger's house in the dark, in the middle of the night, the evening. It's evening. And I have no idea where I'm at and how to get the fuck out of here, right? So I ignore his words. I pull up in the alley and I stop, like right just past the sidewalk. So I don't even know if there was sidewalk, but just past this little walkway. So if someone walked by, they could get through. And as I pull up, I look at the house. It's not an ominous house, but it was, and it's not a farmhouse, but it was like an early, maybe built in the 20s, farmish house. Even though it wasn't on a farm, big farmhouse, it wasn't like a big Victorian, but it had a porch. It went from the front all the way around to the side. There was a side door on the porch, 2-story. Some Victorian houses have like the big rounded, like the rotunda or whatever it is, it sticks out. It wasn't that, but like I want to say there was another adjoining room off the one side. So sort of ominous looking. The house hadn't been updated in a while. Not a trashy looking house, a nice house, but like just kind of unsettling for the scenery. And he wanted me to park behind it. Fuck that. So I get out of the car and the guy meets me on the porch. And immediately he's gruff. He's this wiry, small. I don't want to be too descriptive. Not really. Not a little awkward, maybe a little socially awkward. Maybe that played into what I thought was going on here. But just this awkward little strange guy comes out on the porch and sternly kind of barks at me. He's like, I told you to park behind the house. You can't park in the alley. And I was like, I won't be here long. It'll be fine. I just kind of ignored him and walked up to the porch. And I go to walk in the front door. He's like, no, I told you to come around into the kitchen. I'm like, oh, okay. So now, like, my bearings are off. I'm coming in through the side door in the kitchen. And it just, I had gone on probably 50 or 60 house calls before this, maybe more, because this was at the tail end of my first year. And I used to run about 8 appointments a week. I averaged 8 appointments a week from March up until this time in November. So that's what, 3 to 11. That's 8 months, 8 appointments a week, and probably 6 of those were house calls. So if I'm averaging, 8 months, 4 weeks, 5 appointments a week at 20, that's 500, or that's 100. Yeah, so I've done about 100 appointments if my mental math is correct at almost midnight. I've already done like 100 house calls, and none of them felt like this. I've been in like weird houses before with strange people. I've run the gamut, but this was neither fish nor fowl. This was just weird feeling. So I walk in the house. The guy's not really making eye contact with me, which isn't helping things. And I go to walk in, and there's just shit everywhere. And I don't mean hoarder like dirty food shit, but just stuff everywhere. So, like, I go to sit down. He brings me into the kitchen. And I sit down just like this. And it's kind of funny the way I have my setup in here is if this is the kitchen table, if you're watching on YouTube, that I was sitting at, and I'm facing the camera is where he is, a little bit farther back. And he's got his back to me. And he said, I'm just finishing up my supper. And everything was off. He didn't turn and make eye contact when he was talking to me very much. He was very much into what he was doing. Even though he had told me that he would have enough time to eat before I got there, like he was just starting dinner when I got there. It was just really weird. And the guy's cooking, and you do these sorts of things, you have to make small talk. Hey man, how's it going? Yeah, sorry, I had 2 other appointments before you out in blah 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 city, and do you know where that is? No. You could tell this guy had been outside his own town, but not very often. And I'm trying to get information out of him, like, hey, where you at, blah, blah, blah. He's giving me little stuff, like where he works, because it goes with the territory. And so I opened up the file. And the file I had all the information that Jessica had taken down when she went to the appointment. And I start with his name, that's right, address, okay, I've got it straightened out. Told him I had a hell of a time finding it, and he really had no idea why. So then I asked him about like his employer and his income, like all of the notes I'm going through. I've tried to verify. So you're Joe Blow? No. Like, okay, what's this? And he'll give me the right answer. Go on to the next question. And it's all personal about him that Jessica's taken down. So go to the next question. No, that's not right. I'm like, oh, fuck. So I change. What is it? And he starts telling me, and I change it. Now I'm getting weirded out because if you can't tell, all of the information from the file, other than his name, his address, his phone number, was incorrect information. So now I'm starting to squirm. Like, what the hell's going on here? Like, am I really in the right house? Is he fucking with me? What's going on? So again, making small talk. And I notice he's got like, not a bucket, but almost like a basket on the table next to me. He's got soup cans. He's got food wrappers with no food. Just stuff everywhere stacked up. And like pill bottles that had been filled and some that hadn't. Empty bottles, some with prescription. And nothing like drug related, like pain pills and shit. It just looked like someone who just came home for like 7 or 8 days in a row, just dropped shit on their table and never picked it up. And the kitchen was a little bit cluttered too on the counters and stuff. And of course, watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and other movies like that as a kid, like that's where my mind went to, obviously, because that's natural. And I'm sitting in the kitchen and just it's creeping me out. And finally, I'd start asking him questions, about himself, like, hey, this is a nice house. You live by yourself. And then it took Norman Bates territory. And I guess the way I'm trying to describe this house, or I was a minute ago, is it resembled in a way the house from Silence of the Lambs, where it's like out in the country. There's a road in between the two streets on either side. It was set up similarly, like where you walk in the front room and then off to the side is the kitchen. And then there's like a door that connects. It looks like it goes down to the basement. And I'm sitting here. He's there at the stove with his back to me. And I believe the door, ironically enough, is right here where my door to the office is. And that goes down to the basement because I believe it was cracked. You could see steps that went down from what I can remember. So I'm sitting in the kitchen. I'm by myself. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I have no idea where I'm at. And even if I wanted to text my wife the address to come and find me, she probably couldn't find the house or would have about as much luck as I did trying to find it in the first place. So I'm sitting there and I'm trying to make small talk. And this is where it starts to get into like Norman Batesy territory. I start asking him about the house. Nice house, big house, blah, blah, blah. He says, he tells me, I'm not going to do the impression, but he inherited it from his mom and his dad when they died. And I started getting the suspicion that they were still in the house somewhere. And I could tell that it was his mom and dad's house because he hadn't changed a thing since, like, must have been since they passed. I mean, looking around at and it's not a knock. I mean, it was a single guy in his late 40s, early to mid 50s maybe, living in a rural town, just working, coming home, and oh man, it was so strange. It reminded me of Norman Bates or like the shit like yeah, old lady Miss Lipman, we used to do alterations for her, man. Just like everything is the same, like floral prints, old couches with thick tapestry and not tapestry, but thick material. It's stiff cushions, like shit my grandma would have had back in the 60s, right? But it's all still in his house. Like it was like a time warp. Even the TV, I remember, and this is, down the road, but there's a room off to the side where the living room was where you could come in the front door, which he didn't want me coming in. And it was a big console TV on the floor. And I'm like, holy shit, I haven't seen one of these since like 1989, 1990. So like everything was the same. And it started creeping me out because there's an episode of Tales from the Crypt called Death of Some Salesman. It's a famous episode because it had Tim Curry in it, who played the husband, the wife, and the daughter in various stages of effects makeup. And their thing is they kill salesmen that try to come in and fuck them over. And not that I was trying to fuck this guy over, but like that's the vibes I got. Is like this guy just ain't right. And the situation ain't right. And when you don't feel right in your gut, it's just weirds you out. So hasn't changed anything since mom and dad died. Inherited the house when mom and dad died. Lives there. I'm not so sure they're not still tucked away somewhere in the floorboards or posed upstairs like fucking tourist trap as mannequins or some shit, right? And I'm sitting in the kitchen. All of the information I'm going over, like I said, other than his name, his address, his phone number, is wrong. And I'm so nervous at this point. I've talked about the house. It's just this downward spiral of creepiness, right? And I'm trying to make small talk. And again, he's standing with his back to me. And if you're watching on YouTube, he's just doing this. Grilling something. He's got a frying pan. He's cooking something on the stove. And if I'm asking him questions, he's just kind of it turns around, and it's just like, oh my God, what the fuck have I got myself into? So I'm trying to make small talk. I'm trying to connect with him, trying to get him to talk to me other than just one-word answers. And I swear to God, I'm getting goosebumps, but he's frying something up on the stove, and I couldn't see what it was because he had his back to me. And I'm trying to make small talk, and I say, hey man, that smells pretty good. And I'm just making notes, trying to kill time, get the fuck out of there. Say, hey man, that smells pretty good. What you making over there? And I swear to God, with just the most cold, like, what? It's none of your fucking business answer. He just turns and doesn't even look at me. He just turns over his shoulder. I'm behind him, and he goes, ham. Slow, like a fucking movie. Just slowly turns back and just searing something on the pan, and I'm like, oh my God. And I catch a glimpse of what it is. And it's probably like a ham hock or something, but It looked like a shin bone with some meat hanging off it. I swear to God. Oh my God. I can't believe this actually happened. But it was about maybe 5, 6 inches long, maybe a little longer. But it looked like a human leg bone, a lower leg bone. If you cut someone's leg off, like you cut their foot off at the ankle, and if you cut it off right below the knee, it looked like a human leg bone with like some meat, almost like a lamb chop. You get like the bone with the little gimmick hanging off of it. That's what it looked like, except it was thicker. It looked like a shin. It looked like a human shin bone with meat hanging off of it. And I started getting nauseous. And the smell was terrible. I know it was ham, but it didn't smell like ham. I don't know what it was. And at that point, I was just like looking for the exit. Like, if I got to get the fuck out of here, I'm fumbling with my phone in my pocket, trying to make sure I've got it, that it's charged in case I got to grab it and get the fuck out of there. Like, I'm looking for the exit. I start zipping up my bag, and he's almost like, "What are you leaving for?" And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm just straightening my shit up." And I've got my file here in case I got to break out, and I've got my briefcase so I can just pick it up and hit him with it or go or whatever the fuck. Because this was not turning out well. I was freaked the fuck out. And finally, he gets done with his dinner, cooking it, and he sets it aside to cool. And then he comes and sits down at the table. And I said, "Man, I got to tell you, I'm in a weird spot here because I got your file from Jessica." And he was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I remember her." And that was the only time he even showed any interest, is when I mentioned her, from what I can remember. Um, and I said, the hard thing, man, is all of this information she had down was incorrect. Do you know why that could be? And he said, she wasn't here that long. She came in, she sat down, she got a phone call, she had to go, and then she never called me back. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So, okay. Um, Making more sense. And then when we start talking through stuff, maybe it was awkward for him because the information was wrong. And then finally he starts coming around. But we start talking, and I'm trying to get the fuck out of there. So I'm describing his file, describing his situation. He decides he wants to make a change. I need to facilitate the change on his file. And I can do this via paperwork and mail it to him. And I tell him that because there's no fucking way I'm coming back to this house. He insists that I come back to the house. He will not do business if it's not face to face. I don't know what to do. So I resolve the situation. I pack my stuff up. He's following me out to the car. And now, where he's been zero interest before, as I'm leaving, I almost get the feeling like he's trying to get me to stay. And he's following right behind me. And I just grab my shit, and I'm trying not to be rude and not talk to him as we're leaving, but I'd be lying if I said I was giving him eye contact the whole time and not just facing my car. So he follows me out to the car, down the porch, out to the car. It's starting to kind of frost a little bit. So I'm like, fuck, am I going to have to sit here in his driveway? And, is he going to pick me off while I'm scraping my freaking windshield? And I tell him, "Hey, I got to run. My wife's waiting for me, blah, blah, blah. She knows she's expecting my call." Just trying to cover my ass in case something, right? And finally, I jump in the car, I pull out, and I tear out on the road. I don't even think I was going the right direction. I just got the fuck out of there. Because again, when I walked out, the guy said, "Hey, I told you not to park here. I told you to park behind the house." And I was, again, like, yeah, there's no fucking way I was parking behind the house. I was like, "Oh, I know. I figured this was easier." And I got in the car, talked to you later, got the fuck out of there. I got 30 seconds up the road. I was on the phone with my wife, and I'm like, "Honey, stay on the phone with me. I don't know where I'm at. This is the name of the town, supposedly. Here's the address that I was just at. If anything happens," and I never want to do this to her, right? Just like, I'm out of town. She never knows where I'm at. And that was the thing she always used to say to me is like, "You go all over the place. I don't know your schedule. I don't know where you're going. You could be 2.5 hours away. If something happened to you or you were in an accident, I'd never know." So I was on the phone immediately as I pulled out of this driveway, and I just start hauling ass in the wrong direction out of this guy's neighborhood, down the street, just away. And the whole time I'm on the phone, I'm like, "Just stay with me." I'm checking the rear view, making sure I'm not being followed. It was total paranoia. And it was probably over the top, but total paranoia. And I finally get far enough away. There's no one following. Now I know where I'm going. I get on the bypass and get back on the main road. Um, and I escaped with my life. So I call the guy back, and I'm still trying to push him to do paperwork and not have me drive down. And this guy is insistent on seeing me face to face. So I was so scared by this that when I went back, there was another guy that worked in the office that I used to ride with a little bit, and we do joint casework with. And I called him over. I said, "Hey, man, do you want to take a ride with me in a couple weeks?" It was around, now he wanted me to come back around Christmas because he wanted to do it before the end of the year. And that was our cutoff, too. I wanted to get this case in. So that's how desperate I was, like, to write business at the time. Like, I wasn't going to fuck the guy, but at the same time, I wanted to get this business, and I'm trying to get it through the mail, and he wouldn't do it. So I walk over to this guy who tried to mentor me a little bit, and I said, "Hey, I've got a couple cases. Do you want to ride with me? This one in particular, I will write you in for like 30 or 40% of the case if you just ride with me." No, I'm sorry. I said, I'll write you in for 20% if you ride with me and watch my back. And if you do paperwork, then maybe I'll cut you another 10 or 20%. Just, I owe you. Because I was so afraid to go back down. It was just so creepy, man. And he went, and when we went, the guy was really surprised to see someone else with me, but this time he had cleaned up. The house was straightened up. He met us in the living room instead of in the kitchen. So, yeah, I don't know what the situation was when I went there. Maybe the guy had a bad day or was rattled or whatever, but it was fucking weird. And I start thinking, like, maybe I way overreacted. Maybe it was in my head. Maybe I've seen too many scary movies. I don't know. And I forgot to mention, Jessica was a psychic, whether you believe that or not. She was not like a fortune-telling window dressing storefront psychic. She just would tell me shit. I remember one time my wife and I had a huge fight one Saturday night, and as soon as I walked in the door, she was in her cube next to mine. I didn't even say anything or make eye contact. She didn't even see me. And as soon as I sat down in my cube, she pops her head in and goes, "What happened Saturday night?" And this is Monday morning. And I was just like, "Fuck you. Like, how do you know this shit?" She said, "Because I was woken out of a dead sleep, and I could tell something was going on." So I'm like, holy shit. Talk about chills. But, again, she's sensitive to certain shit. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe you don't believe in that stuff. That's fine. So this isn't making sense to me, and I'm thinking I'm overreacting at this point. And I call her a couple weeks later, and I remember riding to another appointment in the car, and I called her. And I said, "Hey, Jess, I just got to ask you something." And we're talking about, how she left and why and how it wasn't working out and when she knew, because I was feeling like I wasn't going to make it. And we were friends. We were just talking at that point. And I remember asking her, I said, "Hey, you remember this case? And all these files you gave me, and you said they were good to go. They just needed to be sold." Yeah, she said, "Yeah, you just had to close them." I said, "Well, I went on a couple of them. And this one in particular was really weird because," and I gave her the lowdown. I said, "Every time I'd ask him a question, the information was wrong." And she goes, I said, "Did you just fill it in? And were you fucking?" And I kind of, in a way, I accused her of faking appointments. Because let's be honest, she's a friend of mine, but she also lived like an hour and a half away from the office, out of town, near this town that I was visiting. And there were times when I would call her, and she was supposed to be I'm in the office, she's at home, and she says she's making phone calls, but she's sitting by the pool. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of why it didn't work out for her. And I'm like, I don't get it. I don't get it. You had this stack of files. I went down there, and the guy pretty much was just expecting to write paperwork, but none of the information was correct. I said, why didn't you write it? That could have at least gotten you through the next maybe few weeks if you had a couple cases like that, because a couple of the cases did pop. If you already had an in with these people and they were ready to write, why didn't you just write them? And I never forget when she said this. My blood ran cold. She said, "Because when I got to that guy's house and I sat down at his kitchen table, I thought I would wind up on a slab in his basement." all that paranoia, all that shit just crept right the fuck back in, and I knew I wasn't being overly sensitive. So, long story short, I had my own little road trip horror Texas Chainsaw close encounter. Luckily, I survived and nothing crazy really happened, because if it was a movie, some funky shit would have broken out. But man, to be in that spot, first of all, is awkward enough as it is to be in a stranger's house, to be out of town, to be somewhere you don't know, where you can't find the place, where you're already uncomfortable doing the job you're doing because you're fairly new at it. You're young. The neighbor didn't know the guy. And now it's dark and you're disoriented and you walk in. None of the information you have on this cat is matching up. And on top of it, you just get that gut feeling like he's going to turn around. He's already he wants to use your shin for his next meal. I mean, that is the feeling that I got, and it was the feeling that somebody else got that went to see him. So, oh man, it's amazing the amount of houses I visited and places I went to that I never had anything seriously terrible happen, because I met some sketchy fucking people. Mm. I have never told that story on a public forum like this. I've told like to some friends and some family. And maybe I'll have Jessica on to talk about it to give more depth, because I'm telling you, I don't know. I can feel it. I don't know if it's coming through as I tell the story. Like, just how fucking terrified and I'm a big guy. Like, I know you can't see now, but I'm 6'4", I'm like 265. Like, I'm a big guy, and I didn't have the body weight on me like I do now. Back then, I was probably 235. That was a big dude, and I was working out 3 days a week at that point, like running. So, like, I know, like, I was in decent enough shape to take care of myself, especially against this little, wiry dude. But just that feeling like your life is in danger. Oh my God, I was shell shocked for a while. It was hard to make house calls after that, but I went back down with one other guy, cut him in just to go with me, and then someone fucked up. I think I did, but someone fucked up the paperwork. So then when I had to go down the third time, I was like, "Look, I'm not driving all the way to wherever you're at. I'll meet you at a public place." I met at a neutral public place in daylight. And he was pissed about it. He would not fax things back. He would not email. He didn't have email. Oh my God. It was something I was lucky to have escaped with my life with. And I was lucky. Like, I was convinced this was going to be a Texas Chainsaw moment. So with the Texas Chainsaw movie on Netflix, the trailer dropping this week, I wanted to tell my own little close call horror story from my days when I was a somewhat traveling salesman. So I'm actually curious to know. I know a lot of people say, I'm curious to know. What are your thoughts? I want to know if, like, anyone else listening to this, if you've had any real, not even like traveling salesmanship, but like if you've had any of these types of encounters, even with like ghosts or shit, like just these really chilling real life scenarios that feel like they're right out of a movie, or if it was in a movie, there would be some next level shit going on. Like, I'm really curious to see how many people have these types of occurrences on a regular basis. So if you have, hit me up. Bshow podcast. Let's see. Is it bshowbrian@gmail.com? I think. Or just hit me up on socials, or leave a comment under the YouTube video. But shit, man, reliving that, making me feel all sorts of ways. Also, if you're listening to the podcast, please go to iTunes and leave a review, star review, and maybe if you can, just a little blurb about the show. I'd appreciate it. It helps the visibility. And I hope you're enjoying the shows. I'm trying to mix things up, do some different shit here. And I wanted to peel back the curtain a little bit and get away from just fandom and scripts and movies and reviews and opinion, and kind of give you a peek into, some shit that's happened to me, or almost happened to me, I should say. and share an experience with you that I look back on now and kind of laugh about it, but it honestly makes it's an uncomfortable scenario. So I'm out of time. Thanks for joining. Like I said, if you've been through something similar, or if you have a scenario that was a real life scenario that felt like a movie, like a horror movie, put a comment down in the description, in the comment section below, or hit me up on my socials at bshowbrian. But I'm out of time. This is Halloween 365, and that's it for this week.